Hi, I'm Taylor, a college counselor here to answer your questions and help you on your financial aid journey. Wondering if you're a dependent student or an independent student on the FAFSA form? When you complete the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA form, your dependency status will determine whose information will be required on your form. And in most cases, it will also determine who will be required as a contributor on your FAFSA form. Anyone, including you, the student, who is required to provide their information, their consent and approval for the transfer of federal tax information, and a signature on the FAFSA form, is considered a contributor. If you're a dependent student, you'll need to report your parents' information on your FAFSA form, and in most cases, at least one parent will be identified as a contributor. If you're an independent student, you won't be required to report parent information. However, if you're married, you'll need to report your spouse's information, and your spouse may be identified as a contributor. So how do you know if you're a dependent student or an independent student? When completing your FAFSA form online, you'll be asked a series of questions that will determine your dependency status. However, you can also determine what your dependency status will likely be before you start your form. Generally, if you meet any of the following criteria, then you are considered an independent student. If you are 24 years of age or older by January 1st of the school year for which you're applying for student aid. If you are married. If you are a graduate student. If you are currently on active duty or a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. If you have children that you financially support. If you were a ward of the court or in foster care at any time since the age of 13. If you are or were a legally emancipated minor or in a legal guardianship with someone other than your parent or step-parent. Or if you are unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. If none of those criteria apply to you, then you're likely a dependent student, and at least one parent will be a required contributor on your FAFSA form. However, if you're a dependent student and unusual circumstances prevent you from contacting your parents, or if contacting your parents poses a risk to you, you may be able to submit your FAFSA form without parent information and a parent signature. Examples of unusual circumstances include if your parents are incarcerated, you left home due to an abusive family environment, you are a victim of human trafficking, or you've been granted refugee or asylee status. If unusual circumstances apply to you, you should select Yes to the Student Unusual Circumstances question on your FAFSA form. You'll be considered a provisionally independent student, and you'll be able to complete your form without parent information. However, you will need to contact the financial aid office at your school to provide supporting documentation and to receive an official determination on your dependency status. Now let's explore some common questions people often ask about their dependency status. What if the FAFSA form says I'm a dependent student, but my parents don't claim me on their taxes? Or I've moved out of their house and am financially independent? The criteria for being an independent student is determined by the law. Even if your parents don't claim you on their taxes or don't provide financial support, you can still be considered a dependent student on the FAFSA form. What if I'm considered a dependent student, but my parents refuse to participate on my FAFSA form? If your parents refuse to participate on your FAFSA form and you don't meet the criteria for unusual circumstances, you can apply for a direct unsubsidized loan only and complete the FAFSA form without parent information. It's important that you move forward with this option only if you absolutely cannot get your parent to provide their information, consent and approval, and a signature on your FAFSA form. Applying for a direct unsubsidized loan only and completing the FAFSA form without parent information means that you will not be eligible for any other type of federal student aid, including grants, federal work-study, or direct subsidized loans. Additionally, unsubsidized loans begin accruing interest as soon as you receive your funds. If your parents are hesitant about participating on your FAFSA form, remind them that being a contributor doesn't make them responsible for paying for your education costs. If you have more questions or need additional guidance, reach out to the financial aid office at your school. What if my parents aren't going to help me pay for school? Your dependency status isn't determined by whether your parents will be paying for your education or not. Remember, being a contributor on your FAFSA form doesn't make your parents financially responsible for your education. You will still need to report your parents' information if you are considered a dependent student on the FAFSA form. If I'm a dependent student, how do I know which of my parents will be required to participate on my FAFSA form? When you complete the FAFSA form online, you'll answer a series of questions to determine who your contributors are before you invite them to participate on your form. You can also use the Who's My FAFSA Parent wizard before you begin your form. The tool takes most people less than 10 minutes to use, and it will help determine which parent or parents will need to participate on your FAFSA form. You can access the tool at studentaid.gov/FAFSA parent. No matter your dependency status, it's important to complete a FAFSA form every year you're in school to be eligible for federal student aid for college, career school, or trade school. If you have more questions about the FAFSA process, visit studentaid.gov.